Explosive showdown in Congress. Ranking Member Raskin just torched President Trump on live TV. Democrats unleash fury over First Amendment war. Is this the deep state striking back? Buckle up for Raskin's no-holds-barred takedown that could ignite nationwide chaos. Raskin blasts Trump for crushing free speech, labeling him history's ultimate authoritarian threat. ICE killings of protesters, media shakedowns for billions, book bans in DOD schools, all exposed in brutal detail. From Nixon's enemies list to Trump's total federal weaponization, Raskin says no president compares. Is Trump's No Kings Foe movement the real rebellion or Dem desperation? Millions protesting, Disney boycotts raging. Will this hearing flip the script on Trump's iron grip? Smash play, subscribe now. Truth versus power explodes here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for joining us. I'm delighted to be here also with Ms. Jayapal and Mr. Garcia. Our numbers are a little bit diminished today only because of the snowstorm, which has affected some people's travel. But I want to thank everybody for continuing forward on this path and for your vision in calling the hearing, Congresswoman Scanlon. Alexei Navalny, in his book Patriot, says that to bring down the autocrats, everybody's got to do the one thing that they're most afraid of, which is to tell the truth every day, to debunk their lies and to expose the cruelty and the injustice of the regime. And it's a powerful point and a perceptive point because authoritarians detest freedom of speech. They do whatever they can to crush it because free expression is the essential threat to their power, their propaganda, and their platforming of injustice. We have never had a president more thoroughly determined than this one to stamp out the truth, to violate freedom of expression, to punish free assembly, to massacre the right to protest, or to destroy, manipulate, and shake down the press, the media. To be sure, other presidents have singled out political opposition or protests that they've wanted to repress. John Adams had his Alien and Sedition Act back in 1798, which they used to round up supporters of the French Revolution, dangerous French immigrants, and to stifle the pro-Jeffersonian press. Andrew Jackson deployed the Postmaster General to confiscate and criminalize the sending of anti-slavery newspapers and magazines and literature into the South before the Civil War, and he worked with pro-slavery forces in Congress to impose a gag rule against submission of anti-slavery petitions in blatant violation of the First Amendment clause favoring the right to petition for redress of grievances. President Nixon conducted harassment and surveillance against the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, people on his political enemies list, and he used the COINTEL program to try to disrupt opposition political movements. But no president ever transformed the entire machinery of the federal government into an instrument of political propaganda, censorship, and repression the way that Donald Trump has. As aspiring presidential dictators go, he is simply in a class by himself, which is why America now has a No Kings movement of tens of millions of Americans that has risen up to counter him. Trump makes no pretense of respecting any part of the First Amendment. He merges his insatiable greed and his authoritarian politics with his snarling dictatorial desire to stamp out any political, legislative, social, cultural, or intellectual expression that he personally disagrees with. The central purpose of the First Amendment is to safeguard speech, assembly, and protest for the purposes of democratic self-government and nonviolent change. But Trump and MAGA have built a masked paramilitary force in ICE and unleashed it, along with CBP agents, to harass, attack, arrest, and even kill Americans for exercising their First Amendment rights to record and protest government actions taking place in the public space. Unprovoked and unjustified, Trump's ICE soldiers shot down and killed in cold blood 2 U.S. citizens, Renee Good, a 37-year-old poet and mother of 3, and Alex Preddy, a VA ICU nurse both of whom were peacefully observing and protesting the actions of federal immigration officers taking place on public streets in Minneapolis. Many others have died or been wounded in Stephen Miller's reign of terror against American communities. A young man protesting in California is permanently blind in one eye thanks to federal officers hurling a projectile towards him. An emergency room nurse in Oregon, peacefully protesting government violence, was hit in the face with a tear gas canister. Rather than investigate these murders and assaults on citizens, of course, the Trump DOJ defames the victims, calling them domestic terrorists and claiming they were going to assassinate ICE officials or otherwise were themselves at fault. Well, if they're willing to kill Americans for their speech, you know there's nothing else they won't do to us. They kicked off the authoritarian parade by issuing executive orders against law firms disfavored by Trump, purporting to ban their lawyers forever from federal contracts, federal employment, even federal buildings, including federal courthouses. These blatantly unconstitutional orders, ultimately struck down on free speech, right to counsel, and due process grounds, succeeded in intimidating enough law firms to settle with Trump to gain him and his MAGA movement $1 billion worth of pro bono services for any causes or cases that Trump chooses. Again, nothing like this has ever happened in American history. He executed a parallel shakedown on colleges and universities, threatening their grants, their financial aid programs, and their student visas if they wouldn't allow Trump to take over their admissions processes, their faculty hiring, their curricular offerings and course content. This brutal assault on academic freedom has taken a huge toll on American universities and continues to this day. Meantime, Trump has engineered a new trademark shakedown of broadcast and media entities, suing them personally for millions or billions of dollars on totally frivolous grounds, and then using the Federal Communications Commission as a weapon and a cudgel to force their compliance and settlement of fines with the president. Trump sued 60 Minutes and CBS for $20 billion for the frivolous cause of action that he thought an interview, not with him, but with Kamala Harris, was edited, in Trump's view, too favorably towards her. And then he walked away with a cool $16 million in a shakedown settlement for his personal library, all part of now a familiar pattern. When he doesn't like the news, he sues the broadcaster and unleashes the FCC on them until they pay up and agree to have a pro-Trump MAGA government minder or spy stationed in their office. The Republican-controlled FCC essentially blackmailed media companies Skydance and Paramount into agreeing to install a spy to police CBS News to make sure that they're being sufficiently pro-Trump in order to get approval of a merger they wanted from the FCC. Donald Trump doesn't have a First Amendment bone in his body. He calls the free press the enemy of the people, when the press are the people's best friend. He calls reporters the most dishonest people ever created by God. During his first term, he threatened to change libel laws to make it easier for him to sue the media that publish unflattering pieces, though truthful, about him. The administration has banned news organizations from the White House press pool for reporting stories he doesn't like. And the FBI, astonishingly, just executed a search warrant at the home of a Washington Post reporter, seizing her phone, 2 laptops, and a smartwatch in connection with the case of a government contractor who was accused of taking home classified material. The administration has systematically deleted the use of politically incorrect words on government websites like diversity or equity or science-based, a completely Orwellian exercise in the censorship and manipulation of ordinary language. Trump has turned public schools run by the Department of Defense into political pawns of his censorship regime, banning books like To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee and The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, or Native Son by Richard Wright, or George Orwell's 1984, or The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, for the curriculum which thousands of children of armed service members attend. Those books are no longer available to them. It never ceases to amaze me how they keep censoring books about censorship, like 1984 or The Handmaid's Tale. And this administration has been waging a war on civil society groups, threatening to remove the tax-exempt status of organizations critical of his administration and issuing an executive order purporting to designate Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, despite the fact that they cannot identify its headquarters, its organizational structure, or its leadership. Well, of course, not designating the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, or a host of violent white supremacist groups. Well, all of these attacks on freedom, democracy, the rule of law, the right to assemble, the right to petition for redress of grievances, the right to free press, all of them have kick-started in an equal and opposite reaction. Millions of people are standing up for the freedom of speech across the country, for the rights of people to protest, for the rights of the press to do their jobs unimpeded and unintimidated. The people of Minneapolis have shown us the way by engaging in collective solidarity and mutual self-help to challenge authoritarianism, and millions of Americans have been participating in the No Kings protests across the country and are getting for another one coming up at the end of March. And an astounding 3 million people canceled their Disney and Hulu subscriptions after ABC, under pressure from Trump and his FCC chair, Brendan Carr, suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live in response to a joke, calling into question President Trump's views. The show returned to air a week after the suspension. So America is still a country that loves freedom and loves the First Amendment and is standing up for the First Amendment, and that, along with courts that are increasingly taking on the president, will be our way through this before we can get to the next election. I thank, again, Ms. Scanlon for organizing this, and thank our panelists for their participation, and I look forward to the dialogue today, and I yield back to you.